Holy happy hour, Batman! I am Father Ben. I am an Episcopal priest. I am co-founder of the All Ports Open Network. And on this show, Holy Happy Hour, Batman, I am joined by heroes of the gaming and geek world to talk about things like life, faith, spirituality, game design philosophy, the ttrpg industry, and whatever else comes up. So tonight, I am extremely thrilled to be joined by award-winning game designer and publisher Jay Dragon. Jay wrote the critically acclaimed game Wanderhome, you may be familiar with, and is the creative director and head publisher over at Possum Creek Games. So that does include the extremely successful Yazebas Bed and Breakfast that crowdfunded on Indiegogo recently. Again, you may have heard of it. I'm very excited to have Jay on the show. I can't wait to talk to Jay in just a few minutes about game design, philosophy, life, whatever, worldview. I don't know what we're going to talk about on the stream. It's going to be fun. If you've got questions, bring them to the chat and we'll give Jay a chance to answer them. I'm really excited about it. So stick around. That's all coming up on this episode of Holy Happy Hour Batman. Speaking of crowdfunding, before we get started tonight with Jay, and you can already see I kind of have it stuck up there on the screen. If you're watching this, you can see it's stuck up there on the screen. I want to take a moment for some housekeeping, and that includes talking to you all about our game from Apon Games called The Hard Lessons. So this show, Holy Happy Hour Batman, is part of the All Ports Open Network, and the game publishing wing of the All Ports Open Network is Apon Games. We just launched our first crowdfunding campaign. We are itch funding The Hard Lessons. The Hard Lessons is a GM-less storytelling and world-building game about a great master who has died, and their students who have gathered for one last night to share stories, to raise a toast to the master, and to share lessons they learn from the master, and ultimately, together, to decide the fate of the master's school. If you ever dreamed of playing something out, like the scenario I talked about last week on the show was if you are all playing former Robins and Batman has died or disappeared, and it's hard for me to imagine Batman dying, but Batman has died or disappeared, and you're gathering to share the stories you learn from the Batman and decide which one of you takes up the cowl. It's that game. This is the game for that. But it's completely setting neutral, which means you can play it with any kind of master that you want to. It could be a master chef. It could be the first astronaut to lead an expedition out of our solar system. It could be an evil lich and her minions. It could be literally whatever you imagine. So the exciting thing is that we funded the game. We funded the full edition, digital edition of the game. That was our first goal. And we funded our second goal, which was to do character record sheets, kind of like a stretch goal type thing. And we are now trying to fund our third goal. The rest of our goals are all what we're calling play sets. That is basically skins of the hard lessons that we reskin for a particular genre or setting. And the first one is pirate setting. The first one is a pirate play set. So if you're anything like me, you might be currently obsessed with a certain gay pirate show, Our Flag Means Death. And if you want to play Our Flag Means Death type game of the hard lessons, help us fund, and you'll be able to do that. So head over to itch.io, help support this game, help us reach our next goal. We're less than $50 away from that next goal, which is really exciting. And you can see the link is right there on the screen, bit.ly/thl-itch. It's right there on the screen. It'll be in the show notes, all that good stuff. Hey, we've got a really cool episode. I'll get rid of that, the Hard Lessons ad now. We've got a really cool episode next week of Holy Happy Hour. I just want to tease out a little bit. It kind of was something that we had a cancellation, and I was able to kind of put something together at the last minute for next week that's different than what I usually do with Holy Happy Hour, but I'm really excited about it because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So we have kind of two guests next week besides me. Allison Cole and Dora D. Rogers are going to be crowdfunding their game Alchemistress in June. And this is a magical girl game. It sounds really cool. We're going to talk about it next week so you can learn more about it. It sounds awesome. But what we're actually going to do next week is, in addition to learning about Alchemistress, we are actually going to learn a little bit about making characters in that game, but we're going to use the characters that we make next week on the stream to play my game, Broken, a tragic romance game, which will be crowdfunding in July. So we're going to make magical girl characters, and then we're going to break them up in a game of Broken. So this will be the first actual play of Broken we do on stream. Nobody has streamed the game before. I have not streamed it. I've done podcasts of it. I've played a ton of playtests of it. This will be the first time we're playing it on stream, and so it'll be really cool and really exciting. And I hope you'll check it out. If you want to know what Broken is like, next week is a good chance to find that out. So that all came together today at the last minute, and I'm really excited about it. And I will link to Alchemistress details in the show notes for this also, so you can kind of learn a little bit about that if you want to in advance. So look out for like ads for that this week. It came together so last minute that I didn't have a chance to put together details for you, visuals or anything yet, but we will do that in the next couple hours, days, so that you can get hyped for that. That's all next Monday night, 7:30, same bat time, same bat channel, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time here at Holy Happy Hour Batman. Okay, so it is happy hour, and so you can see on the screen we have our cocktail of the week, inspired by Jay Dragon being on the show. I really was conflicted about what kind of cocktail to make for this. I was like, do I want to make something inspired by Sleepaway? Do I want to make something inspired by Wanderhome? But I really wanted to make something inspired by Yazebas Bed and Breakfast. And so this is my B&B Bobolini. So it's sort of a brunch themed cocktail recipe. And so it's my take on the Bellini, but yes, with boba tea. So or boba balls, the little bobas. By the way, if you don't know this, you can actually make them pretty easily at home. So you could make your own. I don't know how you would make them peach like this, but you could make some they're just tapioca starch balls. You can make them yourself. But for this cocktail, the B&B Bobolini, you're going to start by making a peach puree. So it's really easy. Just take your blender out. Cut up 4 white peaches, and white peaches are what you're going to want to use for the flavor. 4 white peaches. Throw a couple ice cubes into the blender. Throw a half ounce or so, or maybe a little more, of bourbon if you want to kind of spice it up a little bit with some bourbon. A little bit of lemon juice, some simple syrup to make it sweet, and blend that all together. That's going to be your peach puree. That's going to be your base for the cocktail. Then you're going to take a champagne flute or a similar wine glass, and you're going to put 2 ounces of that peach puree at the bottom of the glass. You're going to put 3 ounces of a chilled Prosecco or other sparkling wine or champagne or something like that in with the peach puree, and the boba pearls. You're going to stick the boba pearls into it. So basically, you can buy peach boba tea pearls, and that's what I would recommend for this, so it has that peach flavor. But if you wanted to mix things up, you could put any flavor boba in there you want to. And here's the thing, like, if you really want to be crazy about this and have it be like a brunch party, you could just get like a variety of boba pearl flavors, and then you can let people make their own, right? People could just put their own flavor they want in theirs, make them different, and then use the same peach and Prosecco to kind of like, for all of the cocktails. But everyone can have their own sort of flavor, blend with their boba pearls by whatever boba pearls they choose. So that's my B&B Bobolini. That's my Yazebas Bed and Breakfast inspired cocktail. My rule at Holy Happy Hour is always, if you try it, you have to tell me. I want to hear about how good it is. Oh, I do have, before we bring Jay on, I actually almost forgot something really important. I do have one thing I want to say. Right now, over at the One Shot Network Twitch stream here on One Shot, Jeff Stormer is running the annual Miracle Monday Super Stream. It's been going on all day, and it's raising money for a cause that is close to my heart, raising money for Trans Lifeline. And so I'm hoping you're watching my stream. I guess you are watching, as if you hear me talking right now. And I'm glad you're here to watch me and Jay talk in just a moment. But it'll be really super cool if you also want to check out, donate, and consider donating to the Miracle Network. The One Shot Network Miracle Monday Super Stream fundraiser for Trans Lifeline. I will link it in the chat. It'll be in the show notes. I don't know that you can donate after the fact, but you could always find a way to donate to Trans Lifeline no matter when you're watching this later. So if I can figure out my computer, I will drop that link in the chat. And there it is. So I see in the chat a certain person that may be married to me said, what a great idea for a drink, because it was, in fact, the boba part was Melissa's idea. So credit where credit's due. And it was a really good idea. All right, let's not waste any more time. Jay Dragon is waiting. Let's bring Jay on the show. Let's switch over to... I'm not... somebody in the chat's being funny. Let's switch. Jay Dragon, welcome to Holy Happy
Why,
Hour.
hello, my darling husband. Hi, hello.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty well this fine Monday evening. I had to look up at the the clock to make sure that it was Monday.
Oh, and I know the feeling all too well. I think me doing this stream on Monday helps with my clock, right? Like every Monday I do a new stream, that starts a new week.
God, that makes sense. For me, it's always I always like to go to this coffee shop, and they close on Tuesdays.
Okay.
And so for me, that Tuesday always feels like the climactic week event where it's like I'm forced to mix up my schedule.
Oh. Yeah, someone said I thought it was Tuesday. I missed the stream. No, you did not miss the stream, which I think you figured out because you're in the chat. Yeah.
You solved the riddle, I see.
You know what? I can't stand it when I am like a creature of super routine. I'm very much like, and I don't like when things, I have a really struggle with change. I have a lot of trouble when things I depend on, and I depend on weird things. Like recently, our favorite vegan restaurant changed their menu, and I almost like had a freaking panic attack. Like I wasn't quite that bad, but it was like it was a lot. It was like, and all they did was change the menu. In fact, it could be better. I don't know, but I didn't even give it a chance to be better because it changed.
I think especially when you're neurodivergent, it's very like the shift in routine is very stressful. And I have a particular cocktail of neurodivergence that makes it so that it's like other people can change up and I'll be fine, but I like my little I'm like one of those like robots in a video game where it's like I will follow my path no matter what obstacles are moved around me.
Okay.
So I will do my little path. And if you swap out the location of like where I go to with the bathroom with like a cliff, I will fall off the cliff, right? Like just very like, no, I want to like, I will do the same thing. I'll make the same choices, but I will, even to my detriment, even to my disastrous collapse.
I want to know what coffee shop is closed randomly on a Tuesday. Like that's just strange.
So it's because I live in a part of the country that really depends on tourist income, specifically from New York City. And a lot of New Yorkers, like if you're a wealthy New Yorker, right, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you make like 6 figures a year, you'll buy a second house up here in the countryside that you only live in during the weekend.
Okay.
And so the population of the Hudson Valley effectively doubles every weekend. And then, based on what time of year it is, right? And then they all go back on Monday, right? So you can tell if a place is like predominantly catering to locals or if it's predominantly catering to tourists when it's like an auto shop closes on the weekend, the DMV closes on the weekend, the bougie coffee shop that sells like the good chai lattes I like closes on Tuesday and Wednesday because that's when the tourists aren't here.
Right. No, that makes total sense. I get to experience a little bit of that weirdness because I go to Maine all the time. My oldest daughter lives in Maine. So, like, I've had to kind of learn to, being from, like, the Philadelphia area, right, and living in, like, the New York-Philly corridor my whole life, yeah, it's not like that. I mean, if anything, you live in New York and everything's open all the time, 24/7, like, you know. So, like, I had to, like, really learn how to adjust to dealing with spending a substantial amount of time in, like, tourist belt where it's like everything is built on seasons and seasonal tourism too.
Yeah, we have effectively like a whole little vocabulary for like describing tourists, our relationship with tourists, like kinds of tourists, right? Like you go to a town and you understand kind of like what is that town's role in the local culture. Like it's very much like the Hudson Valley has existed for hundreds of years as like a place people go to, and then another wave of people go on top of them, and that earlier wave like settles into the cracks of the mountains. And so you get this effect that's like very similar to like how you get like layers of rock one on top of each other, right? Where it's like Dutch, like Dutch colonizers, German colonizers, Irish colonizers, Italian, Italian, immigrants, Jewish, like Jewish tourists from the Borscht Belt in the 70s, Woodstock hippies, and then like IBM employees, like you just get these layers, and the layers kind of sink in on each other and crush each other down until you kind of end up with these like the mountain men, right, being kind of like the very deepest layers, and you kind of have that effect.
That's fascinating. We kind of have that here in a different way. It's not as rural, right? Like, I mean, I'm in a very urban area. I'm right outside West Philadelphia. We have that because of like smaller migration, right? So, this where I live right now was effectively like in like the 19th century, like summer homes for people in Philadelphia, because distance was different, in like the 18th, 19th century.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then like it just sort of, that was like a layer, right? And then like basically eventually there was white flight from Philadelphia, and that was a layer, and now there's like more layers. So like the same thing is sort of happening here with like racial, cultural, like and socioeconomic layers. And it's like kind of doing the same thing where it's like now there's really nowhere else for people to go. People keep kind of going west here, but like it's just kind of like making those layers you're talking about, where now everyone's kind of just here stacked on top of each other, like in layers. But it's interesting. It's a similar effect, but much more urban.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I think I'm always interested in the country because of the way mountains are, where mountains contain this very unique property. You encounter this linguistically mainly, but it also just shows up culturally there because language is culture. But mountains are some of the sources for the most diverse expressions of language in the world. Places like the Caucasus or the Appalachians, or the Himalayas are places where language families settle in waves, and then they get caught in the cracks as new language families settle over, which is why the Caucasus are some of the most diverse most like linguistically diverse places on the planet. Ethiopia is one of the most linguistically diverse places on the planet, and that's because languages settle in waves. And so that's true of culture as well. And like in a wide flat area, right, a new empire comes in and they just wash across it and nothing like remains. But in mountain ranges, you get all these language isolates of empires that are like 8,000, 10,000, 15,000 years old that have been preserved kind of in these smaller communities.
Wow.
And like certainly the Hudson Valley's history has had its history forcibly eradicated, right? Like we don't see as much of that linguistic diversity as one might expect due to colonization. But even now, 400 years after the Lenape people were, like pulled in camps and pushed away, we see the beginnings of that process start again.
So this is definitely not the like conversation jumping off point for this episode that I expected, which I love. I
have that effect on people.
It honestly is like I should just like the best intros are the ones that do this, where it just like kind of happens, and that is most weeks. Sometimes we start the show by talking about the cocktail, which, by the way, what do you think? Yazebas cocktail, good, bad? Does it sound good?
I'm very into it. It's not the first Yazebas cocktail I've seen, actually.
Really?
I know, but it is, I think. Yes, I know. A board game cafe in New York on the Lower East Side is currently, or I don't know, some part. I don't know my New York City geography.
Sure.
They've got a Yazebas cocktail as well.
That's cool.
Yours has boba though, so like consider me more of a loyalist. So like I want to try it with boba, but I will say there's this one I've sipped. It was really good. Do check them out. If you see them, tell them Jay sent. Hex and Co is the company. So
Hex and Co.
if you find yourself there, go say hi to Hex and Co for me.
That I've been to a game cafe in New York, but I don't think it was that one. There's one.
There's a lot.
Probably a lot of them now, aren't there? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Things have probably gotten cooler in that regard since I was in New York.
Mm-hmm.
There was
things are getting cooler everywhere. There's a bit of an RPG boom happening right now.
Just a little bit. Just a little. Yeah. But we were talking off air. No, see, this is what always happens. It's happening in the chat. No, I'm gonna ignore it. I'm not gonna take the bait that's happening in the chat. We were talking before the stream. Jay and I were talking before the stream about being sucked down rabbit holes. So mine was a game design rabbit hole because I was working on something, and yours was a reading rabbit hole. So I thought that might be a cool jumping off point because you were reading something. People might be interested in what you're reading.
I have been reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Which give me one moment. I'm gonna reach over and grab. Because I think seeing the book kind of helps communicate part of why it has captured me. This is the book. This is its width.
Wow.
I was here at the start of the day, and I am now here.
That is a chunk of book.
So I have cleared out this much book.
Wow.
I am in the last handful of pages. I've got like a few more chapters left to go. It is devastating. It's a book that manages to suck you in by being just dry enough that it feels like you're learning. So what it's about, for those who don't know, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is a fictitious history of the last two great practical magicians of England.
Okay.
So they are, unlike the theoretical magicians who learn about magic, they are practical magicians who can perform magic. And it is the story of how, one of them's the apprentice of the other. They have kind of this tumultuous history. It is written as if it is like a historical biography or like deep dive into this time period. Like it's written like as if it's from the early 1900s, looking back on the early 1800s. And it's fictitious, right? There's a lot of like history. Like as you read more and more, you realize that like it's set in an alternate history. Like there's like references to like kings of England who didn't exist and like things that happened that didn't happen. And it's outstanding. It's wonderful. I have not yet read Piranesi, but I will. And also, thank you, Bird. I have my cardigan. But it is a outstanding book. It's got me thinking a lot about. I relate to the wizards, which is unfortunate because they're incredibly flawed and incredibly messy people, but they are also artists and intellectuals, and unfortunately, I count myself among that number. And reading their critiques of other wizards, I'm like, yeah, I understand that feeling. Like I too would, upon arriving in London, try desperately to make friends with the Prime Minister and like fail at it, right? Like I get like these characters are deeply relatable. I'd also be very worried to make sure people like me. So it's a really like I relate to the characters more than I wish I did. And it's incredible considering how, again, like the book uses its dryness as a weapon. It will like deliver information bluntly in a historical manner to like make it even more heart-wrenching, right? Like when a character dies, it's just like, oh, and they died. And there's no like safety from that. So it's like this moment of like you feel like the world just fell out from under you. Or it uses these long footnotes where it cites primary sources that don't exist. And it uses these footnotes to create to mimic the character's mental states.
Okay.
So like for example, the apprentice, Jonathan Strange, he doesn't show up in the book until the second act. That's not a spoiler. You can tell from the table of contents. He doesn't show up until the second act, but his arrival is foreshadowed through his growing presence in the footnotes, where increasingly his opinions are cited and like his biography is cited, and like he is more and more referenced in the footnotes before he appears in the narrative. Or like when there's moments where they're doing a lot of intellectual research, the footnotes become so long they almost take up the entire page, and like you get the feeling of like as they're looking through the library trying to find more information, they get sucked in. Like the footnotes themselves mirror that feeling of like density of information, which I adore. Right, I love it. It's a I didn't realize she specifically wrote Piranesi. I know like Piranesi is like I can't believe Susanna Clarke also wrote Piranesi. Okay, yes. It's like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is absolutely a tabletop RPG in the sense that like
That's what I was thinking. Yeah,
I
go
feel
ahead.
like you could take it and use it. Like it feels like it doesn't feel like it's not necessarily a tabletop RPG in the sense of like you come away I don't even know how to describe it. It does to you what a good tabletop game does, right? Like it's not even some like it's just like when you have a good session of D&D or whatever and you come away from the table being like, wow, that changed me. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Earl does that to you. I don't know how to put it, but it's a marvelous book, and I also need to read. Now there is no world in which I don't read Piranesi, so that's cool to learn that she wrote that. I don't know how I didn't make that connection before, but yes, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is also it's so much fun because it has all these historical allusions. Like Lord Byron is a minor character.
Oh wow.
Because he was alive at this time. Napoleon Bonaparte is a minor character because like but like also they behave in different ways because their world is different. It's really delightful. And like magic is viewed as this kind of like eccentric art that like has fallen out of style.
Oh, that's cool.
Also is like it's like people being like, oh well, I'm not much for magical history myself. You know, it's really great, really good.
Well, so here's the thing. I've been really struggling to read lately. I don't know what it is, but like I have been in such.
I have also.
Yeah, I want to hear about that. Like, how did you like? Tell us about your slump and your coming out of it.
It's. Mm-hmm. So I was a voracious reader until I was 14, and I was I would read, like my dad would bring me to Barnes and Noble and I would come to him with a stack of books and he'd say, we'll buy the ones that you can't finish here. So I would sit down in Barnes and Noble and I would read all the books I could in like a 3 or 4 hour span. And I'd read like 5 or 6 of these like books meant for adults, right? Like my dad wasn't like I was like just grabbing stuff off the shelves and reading through it. And probably about 90% of the books I've read in my entire life, I read before I turned 14. And then I turned 14, and as happens to teenagers, you start going through terrible things. And the will to read kind of fled from me as I got caught up in the internet and I got caught up in my own life and my feelings and all that stuff. And that's been true for like a decade now. And earlier this year, I've been trying to be offline. I've been doing like basically my rule for myself is that when I have an impulse to start a new hobby or a new craft or something like that, my limitation is that whatever that new hobby or craft is, it cannot involve me being more online than writing in Google Drive, right? Like I can't start watching a new TV show because that means I'll be staring at a screen for like 8 hours a day. But I can journal, I can write, I can read books, I can, keep up with my older hobbies. I can kind of do that stuff. It's all good, but I don't let myself start new things that involve kind of a lot of computer time. And like slowly by doing that, and also like, I don't know, I've been trying to like treating reading as like an activity I know I have to work into slowly. I can't be mad at myself for the fact that I can't just jump straight into reading a book, but rather what I do is it's like, I'm here, or I'm on Twitter or whatever. I log out, I close my computer, I journal for a bit while listening to a podcast, right? Or like I draw, or like I organize and I clean something. And then after that, I've like kind of like, I'm kind of in a stage where then I can read. It's almost like the internet keeps your engagement level, like keeps your stimulation, right? Like, like the sensory information up here.
Yeah. And
in order to read a book gives you like this much sensory stimulation. And if you go straight from here to here, you can't read, right? Like that's just not, you're not getting enough stimulation. You feel bored and itchy and twitchy because you've fallen, you've taken your brains, like, you know, like it's like if you're being bombarded with lights and then you enter a completely dark room, it's gonna feel uncomfortable and disquieting.
Yeah.
Whereas if you slowly ratchet down the amount of light you're being exposed to, by the time you get to the dark room, it'll feel much more comfortable. So that's kind of what I've been doing for myself, and it has been starting to work, which feels really good. I have missed not reading, and also I want to write a novel, and you can't write a novel without reading books.
Well, can you
so
write...
I'm reading,
No, I was going to ask if you can you write ttrpgs without reading books?
Yes. Reading books, writing a ttrpg, you should know how to write well. And one way of doing that is reading books. There are other ways to learn how to write well. There are other ways to learn how to communicate well. That's not a skill you only get by reading a novel. But like if you're writing a ttrpg, you should familiarize yourself with some other ttrpgs as well. You know, it's the sort of thing where it's like a ttrpg should be an enjoyable text, and there's many ways to get that done. A novel should be an enjoyable novel, and while there are many ways to get that done, you should also know what's going on, because nothing is more devastating than feeling like you're the smartest person in the world and you come up with a genius new idea, only to find out that Terry Pratchett did it 40 years ago in some paperback that you could get in an airplane. Yeah.
I feel so with ttrpgs. I wonder about that. I've been feeling kind of like we're in such an explosion in like indie ttrpg explosion, like ttrpgs are more popular right now than they've ever been before, right? Ever. And like just as a whole, and the industry is the biggest it's ever been, and the indie scene is the biggest it's ever been, and like it feels like it's snowballing in this insane, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's a great thing, it's just like an insane way where it's like with each new jam and each new bundle and each new whatever with like itch, you know, there's just so much being done that I'm like, man, how does a person have a original ttrpg idea now? Like it's like anything you can think of, there's like a game version of it, and I just don't know you could even find out if your idea has been done already. I don't even know how you would know. Maybe it's not the same kind of concern.
So I'm gonna say something that's maybe a little bit mean, but I'm on a stream and most fewer people see this than a tweet, so I think it's okay for me to say.
Yeah.
Most tabletop RPGs are very limited in their scope and their capacity to step outside of their comfort zone. Other forms of media have had the advantage of simply existing for longer. This is not something inherent about role-playing games. This is just that we are a younger form of art, right? Like, arguably, artistic experimentation in tabletop role-playing games in a documented way has only been going on for around 50 years. Novel writing has been arguably going on for at least 600. Painting has been arguably going on for at least 700 or 800. Painting in all of its forms has been going on for as long as we've been humans, but painting in the modern sense has been going on, I'd say, like for the past 800, 900 years. Sculpture, right? Sculpture has been going on for the past 2,000 years. Like these art forms have had more time to develop a vast comfort zone. But tabletop role-playing games remind me deeply of a debate that happened in art in the 1500s during the Renaissance. There was a debate between artists about disegno versus colore. And disegno artists claimed that draftsmanship was the greatest quality a painter could have. Whether or not your lines were sturdy. They associated this with masculinity and confidence, and you make these straight lines that are really strong. But Michelangelo and Raphael are these disegno artists, and colore claimed that art was color, that art was vibrancy, that you did not need strong lines, you need to suggest strong lines. And oh goodness, they had their own artists whose names have completely escaped me. But disegno versus, Ruben would be a more modern day, or longer, he would be colore. And so that was the debate. And they thought that was the extent of what art was. They thought that was the fundamental divide within art.
Wow.
Was design versus color, or, Ruben versus Poussin. They thought that was the debate of the medium. And that once they solved that, there would be nothing left to do in the medium. And every single time people argue about system matters, that is what I think about. Because you can go into a museum right now and see art that makes design versus color look ridiculous as a debate framing, right? Like, you go look at a Mondrian or a Pollock or a Picasso or like literally any modern artist of the past, any Impressionist, anyone, and you'll feel like the idea of being like, oh, well, I don't know, that artist's kind of fruity because it's more colore. Like, absurd. And role-playing games are in this phase where, in a sense, this is kind of our renaissance. And I renaissance in the sense that it is an explosion of artistic principles where we are taking ourselves seriously as artists instead of just like content creators who are manufacturing something purely for money with no kind of sense of art behind it. Which is, the Renaissance represented a shift for artists from thinking of themselves like architects or stonemasons or anyone else whose job was to manufacture a product for their client to thinking of themselves as auteurs in their own right. That was kind of part of what the Renaissance was, the life of the artist. This reframing. Tabletop RPG designers are experiencing that as well, where it's going from, we are making a rule book that communicates things as succinctly as possible because it is a manufacturing tool for a client to make something, and we are shifting that over to we are artists, we're making artwork, we're creating expressions of ourselves.
Sure.
And so tabletop role-playing games have not scraped 1% of what is possible with tabletop role-playing games. I don't intend to brag, but I do think that a lot of my work has maybe, if I'm lucky, pushed the knob into 1%, right? Like, I think that, like, there's so much left to be done that, just in a purely expressive sense, that someday in the future, people are going to look back on the question of, kind of our questions of what is a tabletop game, and they're going to laugh at us because we are so limited in our scope. We're so limited in our ability to understand what art can be.
Yeah.
That's my...
Yeah, no, that's good soapbox.
That was my big thing.
That's a good soapbox. I sense that happening. Like, one moment when I very much sensed that happening was the Yazebas sort of pre-campaign emergence, because as stuff was coming out about like what that game was going to be like and what that game was going to do, you just kind of could feel people who were paying attention, the kind of experience of people like that is like, I didn't think that games could these kinds of games could do stuff like that, and like you could kind of see that happening in real time.
Yeah, and it's a thing where Yazebas, I'm not the only person who knows Yazebas, so I feel sort of more confident being braggy about it.
Yeah,
but Yazebas does have, I think, a lot of elements which are at this moment unique among RPGs, or unique in their framing, or unique in some. There are a lot of things that Yazebas plants a stick in the ground about what role-playing games are that is very different than what other games claim to be.
Yeah.
I think a really easy example, which I'm not saying this is like a universal thing that only Yazebas has ever done, but one thing Yazebas argues is that the rules are not the center of the game. Right? Yazebas Bed and Breakfast, by having each chapter be its own rule set, it argues that the center of the game are not the rules you write. The rules you write are just as ephemeral and fluid as any other element of the game world, just as open to manipulation. I've been working on a game right now, kind of just sketching it out, where each playbook is like an actual book, like it's like a zine or a small paperback that contains all the rules relevant for that character, right? Like like the hunter has like in-depth rules on surviving in the forest and catching animals and like D20 mechanics. The boy king has like rules on running your child empire and like managing your treehouse fort and like candy conservation, all that stuff. All these playbooks that have just kind of their own set of rules for their own world. And that's it. There are no rules outside of these playbooks. And so it's been interesting to work on because Yazebas puts it as, oh, rules can be whatever, so we can swap them out as we play. We can bring in whatever rules we need in this moment to play. This game says, oh, rules are whatever, so each person can have their own rule set that doesn't have to directly correlate with anyone else's rule set, and the game will still function even if every person is playing a different game. And like that is like, and that like those are two very strong arguments about what can be done with a tabletop game that no one has, I think, made in a way that is kind of loud and mainstream and present and, kind of very much on center stage. And there will be people who copy that or innovate on that. And in 10 years, it might be partially seen as a norm or like a norm of a school of design. And we might see games that have taken that idea and gone so far beyond it that I couldn't even imagine it. But like, these are just two innovations, right? These are just two approaches out of an infinity of approaches, right? Yeah. That how do we think about a game? There's so many ways to think about a game, and our understanding of what games are is like it's game innovation. It feels hard to see what else is out there because our design, what we a lot of the work I do is about like philosophically when I write articles and stuff is about arguing about trying to expand our understanding of tabletop role-playing games, right? Like including online role-play, including warrior cats on the playground, including kind of all these things, in large part because what I'm trying to do is basically say, like, it's hard to come up with games if, like for example, if your only understanding of what a game is 5th edition, it's hard to come up with games that don't work outside of 5th edition D&D. If your only understanding of games are games, it's hard to come up with things outside of that because you are limited by what you know. And so a lot of what I push to do is say, what if we take all these other things and we call them games too? Mm-hmm. That was kind of the ethos of the lyric game movement. That's a lot of the stuff I drew from lyric game movement and practical stuff is, what if we say all these other things are games too? What happens to our understanding of what a game can be? What does that practically, like if I tell you that the intricate labyrinthine rug on the floor of my therapist's office is a tabletop role-playing game, and we sit down and we really actually think through what that means, what does that mean for other games? How can I take that understanding and bring it back to the design I'm currently working on?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to teach people. That's kind of my whole spiel.
We like literally had this like a mini discussion of this Saturday night. I run a game club and we were talking beforehand about just like what makes a story game a game, like, or like a game, a game that if it's hard. And if somebody, like you said, if somebody doesn't think of games in that way, if somebody only thinks of games where there needs to be some sort of, I don't even know if it's like necessarily competitive element or like for some people, something like The Quiet Year may not compute to them how it's a game, and so like we kind of even had that a little bit of that discussion on. I do think with Yazebas that it is a pretty, at least it feels like a pretty fundamental shift at this moment, right? Like maybe later it won't feel that way as much anymore, but the shift of like
no art will,
right, exactly. But the shift of like the game isn't the rules, the game is this thing that exists, and the rules can change, and the game has a continuity that's not the rules. Because like you think about, I guess you could, Because if you really, I was going to say if you think about D&D, and then I realized there's been all these editions of D&D. So what's the continuity between those things? It seems to exist above, but right, but like there is this idea that the rules of the game are the game, and Yazebas says like, nope, the rules of the game aren't the game.
I've joked that
really
the greatest blessing of the Yazebas bed and breakfast is that no Dungeons and Dragons grognard can seriously look me in the eyes and be like, "Why don't you just hack D&D?" Because no, you can't. You really simply cannot just hack D&D to make Yazebas bed and breakfast. I think that is very self-apparent from the book.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's also it's like, I hope that someday, 20, 30 years from now, people, or whenever, people look back on the stuff I've written and they're like, I don't get what the big deal was with all of this. That is the sign that that's the Seinfeld effect, right? Like like when you're so culture warping and like dominant in your ideology and your persuasive capacity to communicate your perspective on what the world can be like, that everyone just takes it and incorporates it into their world, right? I had this, I was listening to a podcast today where they were talking about how there's this incredible moment in King Lear where King Lear is holding his dead daughter in his hands. Spoiler alert for King Lear, the Shakespeare play. And he's gone mad. He's gone mad, and he's yelling at his servants, "Can't you see her breathing? She's still alive. Can't you see her breathe?" And there's this thing we don't see as modern audiences, but would have been very apparent to the audiences of the time, is that she is breathing because she's an actor and she's alive. And yet King Lear is saying she is alive, but we know within the fiction he is lying. And if you kind of think about how, like, for us, we can kind of take those mental gymnastics as just kind of part of understanding our relationship with media. But for an audience member at the time, there was like a cutting edge thing that a lot of playwrights did in 1600s England, was to play with how the audience perceived truth, right? A character believes they have a real gun and they shoot someone, and it is revealed that was actually a prop gun stolen from a theater, right? Because of course it's a prop gun, right? It's obviously a prop gun, but everyone suspended their disbelief and treated it as a real gun, only to be brought back to the fact that it's fake. And so, like, that is a thing that felt cutting edge in the 1600s, and now it's almost like hard for us to understand how we can even be in a mindset where that's shocking, or we're just very familiar with those mental gymnastics. And so, like, the point of revolutionary art, and I hope my art, I don't think my art is revolutionary in a political sense, but I hope it's revolutionary in an artistic sense. That's kind of what you want revolutionary art to be. But I hope that art that can challenge how people think of art will someday be viewed as mundane, because that means I won.
Yeah.
Right. That means I was able to convince everyone that I had a pretty good point.
So you kind of touched on something that made me think of one question maybe worth talking about a little bit, which is that the idea of revolutionary art, or whatever, is that Possum Creek has a mission statement, right? And then maybe not all game designers have one. Maybe not all game companies have one. Or if they do, maybe it's more of like a sort of more traditional business, like business mission statement. The one for Possum Creek isn't. Do you want to talk a little bit about or would you talk a little bit about like why Possum Creek has a mission statement, like what that is, or like what the idea is behind having one?
Yeah. So when Grubby and I started the company, I think we formally started it. Like, it existed for since 2019, but it started with Wanderhome. We were making the website, and we were like, we want to have something that communicates our ideals. I have a very positivist perspective on kind of communicating my ideology. I really am not a fan of things like Nazis fuck off or like TERFs fuck off, not because that's a wrong sentiment. It's a correct sentiment. It's how I feel. But it does nothing to communicate safety and comfort. It only serves to communicate hostility towards people who I will be hostile towards regardless. And I find it somewhat, we felt it was really important that people who look at our games understand, like, we are in a complicated position because we are a company, and on one level that is a capitalist endeavor, and we can't escape the realities of it being a capitalist endeavor, right? Like, I am petite bourgeois by definition, right? I'm a small business owner. I that is what, like, sure, I'm not, like, I'm not rolling in dough, right? RPGs aren't exactly, that, but I'm petite bourgeois. But we wanted to have a mission statement, both to say, like, to the public, this is what Possum Creek is, but also to have a continuous reminder to ourselves that this is what Possum Creek Games is. So that as we grow as a company, as we continue to work with more authors, we take in, we kind of put out more books, we reach out to more people. We don't forget what the point of it all is, which is that we are not interested in simply making the most money we can. If that was our goal, we would release D&D 5th edition supplements until the cows come home. Our goal is a more, like, and I can't claim that Possum Creek has this kind of moral high ground. We are still a company, right? Like, I am, there's still an unfair relationship built into the structure of our society caused by that existence. But it grounds us and it guides us, and it shows people who look at us like, hey, we are thinking about this on a different level than you expect, right? We are not looking at our games as purely technical endeavors. We are not looking at our games purely as financial endeavors, but rather we understand the complex web between morality, community, spirituality, artistry, finances, and, like, performance that is generated by a tabletop role-playing game. And we have thought hard about our role and function in that space. That's what I hope it says.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, like, if it sounds like this, but I'm just curious if, like, your values sort of shape how to put this exactly, because there's on the one hand, this is almost obvious, but, like, the interaction, I guess, between, what I'm trying to ask about is the interaction between values and the kinds of games you choose to design, and, like, how that interaction sort of works out.
Yeah. So all art is autobiographical. That is a also, thanks, Mav. I feel like realism of perspective is the goal I go for. Um, uh, all art is autobiographical. That is kind of an inescapable part of art. And the more you try and pretend that your art isn't autobiographical, the more of you shows through in it in unintended and unwanted ways. um, but I right now I make kind-hearted games. I write a lot of games that are about people being kind to each other in communities over long periods of time. This is a radical departure from what I wrote when I was younger. When I was younger, I wrote monstrous horror. I was really captivated by body horror, by psychological horror, by survival, by, like, kind of the impossibility of survival in an unfair world. And Sleepaway was kind of my bridge from, like, that world into Wanderhome, into Yazebas. And, like, horror artists are oftentimes also very good at rendering sweet things. It's kind of, once you understand how to scare someone, you also understand the flip side of that. But I think my games reflect my politics, and I bring in consultants for where my politics and my lived experiences fail me. But I think that, like, I I think that the ideas that interest me are the ideas that also like ideas that interest me are the same ones that interest me politically, right? Like I have political interests and I have artistic interests, and because I am who I am, those overlap. And my political interests lean very left wing, and because of that, my artistic interests lean very like I like the things that captivate me artistically are similar and overlapping with the things that captivate me politically. I don't like assigning like political morality to game mechanics. Sometimes I kind of see people do that a little bit, where it's like, oh, GM-less games have no game master. They're more free. They're more like they're more anarchist, and it's like, no, they're not. They're that's not a great framing, because I'll write plenty of games with game masters. It's not about that. I think it is, though, that I learned about belonging outside belonging through partially Avery's discussions of a game system, which also carries a moral component.
Yeah.
Right. Or like a political component, right? The way she introduces belonging outside belonging is that it is it is a system that is both, it has these kind of principles to it, but also has these kind of like thematic principles of community outside the mainstream. And that was kind of what got me into designing tabletop games. And so like the mechanical systems that interest me tend to be tied to the leftist philosophy that interests me, and like tends to be informed by the leftist philosophers who I enjoy. But it's not quite, it's not like, it's not transferable, right? You can't go back the other way and be like, you're a fascist for liking games with dice. That's obviously very silly. Me too, Chaotic Blade 5. I also like games that treat the GM as a fellow player rather than a god. When I was first joining tabletop RPGs, there were two understandings of the GM, and both of them infuriated me, which was either the GM as this all-powerful god or the GM as a servant who is scrambling to make the other players happy. And I always felt that both perspectives were really bad. And I would have had much more strong opinions on that, but then I didn't end up writing a game with a single GM in it, so I ended up not having to really think about my opinions that hard.
What about GM as like an opponent? Does that fit into one of those two?
I love adversarial GMs. I think they're cool. I think that they're cool in a game a game that understands what it means for there to be an adversarial GM. I think is really exciting because so for example in LARP, right, when I was younger I used to LARP a lot, and I'd play a monster oftentimes, right, because that's what the staff do, is you play as these monsters, and the function of the monster was to make an entertaining fight for the kid, was to attack the kid and claw at the kid, and the kid could overpower the monster, the kid could escape, but if the kid didn't, you kill the kid. You make a feast out of the child's body, right? You eat the corpse and you like howl to your fellow monsters, and your other monsters eat the corpse. But if a kid can't fight, the kid dies. And in a sense, that's adversarial, right?
Yeah.
Because it's saying, I am a challenge that you must overcome. And the stakes, this is not about telling a good story. This is about, you need to fight me and I will kill you if you fail. And like, that is in a sense adversarial, but I also really love it because everyone kind of understands like that's the thrill of the monster. And I think that like there's this concept at my summer camp called which was basically this idea that there's some games that are competitive. So like hide and seek is a competitive game. Football is a competitive game. Soccer is a competitive game. And there's cooperative games. Board games are all on board with this already, right? Like Spirit Island is a cooperative game, right? Like even games like what do you call? I'm trying to think of games that are cooperative. There's a lot of like circle games that are cooperative, like passing the energy or like doing a shared song. Rituals are very cooperative. And what we talk a lot about is the idea of competitive cooperation or cooperative competition, which is to create an environment in which there is joy in winning, but there is no shame in losing. And like kind of creating an environment like tag, right? Where when you're playing tag, you don't mind getting tagged and you want to tag someone, and so like theoretically getting tagged is losing, but it's not a shameful sensation. It's not bad to be tagged. It is exhilarating. And so like the idea of cooperative competition, I think, is like an approach to GMing that's always deeply resonated with me, and also just like an approach to play styles, right? Like Monster Hearts or a lot of these other games, you are an adversarial player to your other players in a sense, right? Like you exist to make their characters' lives harder. Even in games like Dream Askew, you're able to like challenge each other. I think that style of design is really thrilling, and I think that there is kind of a counterpart to the like, you know, like there's the jackass DM, right?
Yeah.
But there's also kind of the counterpart to that, which is the like, I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. I guess maybe the best way to put it would be, in Scandinavian LARPing or Nordic LARPing, there's this concept called play to lose, which is the idea that when you're in an adversarial game, there is fun in losing. And one time I was playing a LARP where the purpose of the LARP was that you were basically playing Red Rover and you were trying to run away from this sensual blob monster, which if it got you would incorporate you into itself. It was really interesting. But afterwards, one of the LARP players, a Nordic LARPer, said that this game couldn't work in Sweden because everyone would let themselves be caught by the blob because that would be playing to lose, and that it was actually more noble to let yourself get caught by the blob rather than genuinely try to run away until you're too exhausted to run. Which misses the point, right, of kind of the meaningful part of running away from this inevitable death. And in that moment, I was like, oh, there is this counterpart to this pure competition, which is this like idea of like capitulation. I don't know. There's kind of like capitulation to the extreme, where it goes from where it crosses the line from I think where it crosses the line from competition into people pleasing. And when you've got people who want to please other people, and they're fawning and they're relying on these trauma mechanisms, which are not healthy, that are like, you know, like, I need to make everyone happy.
Yeah.
That is bad. That's just as bad of a table culture, I think, in a sense, in a more insidious way. But also, it's been a long time since I've had to deal with any of that. And it's not.
Well, I was just thinking that there's a really potentially bad combination when you combine an adversarial GM with the GM as all-powerful God, because if you're both an adversary and the power differential is so great that, you know, that it becomes, that's where you have like, you know, abusive table culture. But that's yeah.
Yeah, that's where you get that. It's a model of play which denies people unless you do so where people have the ability to like at that point it's like kind of like you're doing kink, frankly. Like at that point you need a safe word and like an understanding that people are LARPing as a jackass DM, right? Like, because if someone genuinely wholeheartedly believes that like, I am the jackass DM, I am the god, that's bad. That's extreme. Like, they can't legitimately believe that. They have to be performing it for a group of people who think it's fun to be in that environment, right? Like, that has to be a performance at that, a meta performance, right? Like, that's the healthiest, right?
Yeah. Well, so not to shift gears too hard and dramatically, but this is Holy Happy Hour, and sometimes I get through a whole episode and we never ended up talking about anything spiritual, and I don't want that to happen tonight. I really want to talk about your spirituality, so I don't have a good entryway into it, but I really wanted to talk about like sort of your spirituality, your worldview, like what it is. I don't know. We can kind of jump in wherever you think it's a good place to jump in.
So I am, I'm like non-denominational, animist, spiritual. I don't consider myself Wicca, but I am like adjacent to a lot of that stuff. I think like, I don't know, like I'm polytheist in kind of the loosest way possible, but like I'm very animist, I think, is maybe my my spiritual beliefs. And that's been true for a long time. I had some supernatural encounters that served to convince me pretty strongly that it's the sort of thing. I was talking to a friend and I asked them why they're Catholic, and they told me, oh, well, because I had a spiritual revelation that made me, that was like definitive proof that Catholicism is correct. And I was like, yeah, reasonable. That would, I would convert to Catholicism if an angel appeared before me. Good, touche. But similarly, I had some experiences where I was like, this is the work of a supernatural force, and I am suddenly aware that I am on the shallow end of a depth of spiritual reality that I can't comprehend. And I'm not equipped to go very deep into this world. So I kind of think of myself as living in like the kiddie pool of this kind of deeper understanding that like there are incredible powers at work in the world far beyond my comprehension. And I just try not to evoke their attention or wrath, but rather sit with, kind of the smaller forms of that I find, in whatever forms it takes, right? And like in a lot of different ways. And like it's also part of the thing is that I live in the Hudson Valley, and you live in the Hudson Valley, it's really hard to be an atheist in the Hudson Valley. And there's a lot of different ways you can end up spiritually. But like belief in angels, a lot of folk beliefs, crystals, devils, fairies, various people find different things. But when you live in the Hudson Valley, it's really hard to steadfastly insist that everything is as it is.
I muted myself and I forgot which thing I muted myself on. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, it's that sort of numinous experience.
Yeah. Well, it's just like it's the sort of thing where it's like there's some places where it is just an invitation for kind of this level of deeper self-reflection, relationship with nature, and relationship with the spiritual. And like you can't, like it's just present in some places, I think, more than others. And here it is, it's very deeply present. And like, it's part of the, like there are downsides to it, right? Like the Hudson Valley is a birthplace for a lot of cults. There's a lot of like not good religious organizations that have emerged from this area because of that, the fact that it's just people are very spiritually aware here. In a way that like can be bad, but also it does mean, right, that like there's a lot of kind of positive spiritual awareness, and like everyone kind of has something that they carry with them in some form or another, regardless of what that shape takes.
How far upstate does Hudson Valley region go? Like how far?
So the Hudson Valley is technically from Albany. So like there's Hudson Valley is from Albany to like Westchester is I think kind of the greater Hudson Valley region.
Gotcha.
Hudson Valley like oftentimes refers to the mid Hudson Valley, which is like on the through, if you're going up the throughway from New York City to Albany, I-87, it's like exits 16 to 22.
So sorry, there's a really long message in the chat there. I'll try to dive.
I'm reading as well.
The reason I was asking about the Hudson Valley is just like a very me thing, is only because our network hosts a show written by my network co-founder Josh called Weeping Cedars, and it takes place in, I'm not sure where in upstate New York it takes place, but it's a horror show.
What's the town?
It's a fake town called Weeping Cedars, so it's not in a real town, but it's a podcast that takes place it's the history of this haunted town in New York, and it very much has that, like, something about this. It's very place oriented, right? Like it's like horror story as place, and so when you were talking about it, it just made me think, oh, how big is the Hudson Valley? But
well, the Hudson Valley, it's home to we have Sleepy Hollow happened around here. Washington Irving wrote Rip Van Winkle to be set here. That one's fictional, but based on a Lenape folktale / just story. So that kind of story is present here. Meg Baker actually wrote a beautiful game about Rip Van Winkle, about this area. And there's other myths here too. Besides, there's trolls in the mountains. There's a lot of like, it's the same mountains that you get in Scotland and Ireland. It's this
Yeah.
part of the same continental mountain range. So you get
Interesting.
kind of that same. You get a lot of the feelings like people write about with Scotland and
Mm-hmm.
Ireland, and like that kind
Mm-hmm.
of like that kind of British folklore.
Yeah.
You understand the emotions of it in the Hudson Valley. Also, Mav, I feel you. I feel like it's interesting how like I feel like spaces kind of harbor or reject spirituality, and I do feel like I don't know, Silicon Valley has such an odd perspective on spirituality that it's like kind of hard to imagine spiritual existence outside of it, whereas like the Hudson Valley has always kind of benefited from the fact that like religions that weren't accepted elsewhere would oftentimes flee here. And so you'd get like a lot of, and like again, a lot of cool stuff came out of that, like the Borscht Belt, and like a lot of Jewish folks, a lot of Hasidic Jews settled up around in this area, and that's awesome. But also, you get the bad part of it, right? Where like Mormons, sorry to any Mormon listeners, but like Mr. Mormon, what's his name, started around here as well.
Mr.
So.
Mormon. That is his, that's
I'm
definitely
sorry.
no, 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 no. That's his name now for sure.
LDS Mormon,
Yeah,
yeah. Lawrence Darren Sarens Mormon. Yeah.
I don't think I realized he started in that area before started migrating west.
Yeah, it was I think it wasn't technically the Hudson Valley. It was like I think a little bit more north and west, but like, you know, it was originally he was like originally Deseret is in New York, and then New York State was like, you cannot be here. And he was like, Deseret is in Utah.
Yeah,
We found the second place where Deseret is.
yeah. I don't know something about. So I had, and I don't know that I have a fully articulated like view of this or theology of this or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But when I was in seminary, I traveled to India, and I was in India
Mm-hmm.
for like 4 weeks, and I came back to the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
and I had such a dramatic experience of it because, and it was like
Mm-hmm.
kind of. It was both a positive and then a negative experience. And the positive experience, like I loved being in India and I loved everything about that trip. And it was just a really wonderful time there. But like there was something about it that there was like an aliveness, like a vibrancy to it. When I came back to the U.S., like partially because there was just so many less people. Like it's just like I was in. I mean, there are obviously very rural parts of the Indian subcontinent. I was in
Mm-hmm.
like very high population centers. I was in Bangalore. I did
Mm-hmm.
visit the coast, which was a little smaller. It was like a college town, and I was in Mumbai, one of the
Mm-hmm.
most populated cities in the world. And then I came back to the U.S. So there was like, first of all, I'm like, where is everybody? Like, where are all the people? There's no people around. Like, there's a street and
Mm-hmm.
it's not just full of people. And that was a little bit jarring. But like, there was something about coming back to the U.S. that I remember feeling cold and empty and like void. And I remember feeling like there was
Mm-hmm.
something spiritually vibrant about being in India, in the place. Like something about the place felt this
Mm-hmm.
spiritual vibrancy.
Yeah.
And I've had similar experiences to that feeling in
Mm-hmm.
like nature and rural areas where I'm like, this place
Mm-hmm.
feels spiritually
Yeah.
intense to me, like a thin space type
Mm-hmm.
idea. And like coming back to the US from India, like it just felt so sterile in some ways. Like, and it was
I
such a
think that
weird
there's
thing.
been a I think there's been a very intentional movement on the part of kind of like whiteness, the death cult that is whiteness, right, is a process of sterility, even kind of like this abstract amorphous Christianity that's not actual Christianity, that's just kind of like a political, tool, that has no connection to faith, is about sterility. I think that there's been kind of an intentional process of removing spiritual significance from the United States. Like I think suburbs and I think like a lot of like housing, like a lot of like projects have been done on this land to make it feel dead, to kill the spiritual heart of the land, right? Because like, ultimately the spirit, I don't know, I don't want to delve too deep into kind of my thinking, but I just feel like
Well, you can
the
feel free
spiritual heart
to,
of
just so you know. You feel free to go as deep
the
as you want.
spiritual heart of this land does not belong to the settlers, right? The spiritual heart of this land belongs to the actual inhabitants of Turtle Island who have lived here for thousands of years. And in order to colonize the land, you can't just colonize it physically, you must also colonize it spiritually. And so there was a widespread process of eradicating spiritual presence as well as, like physical presence. And it means that, like the land here is deeply traumatized and is deeply scarred, right? Like I live in a pretty densely forested area, and those forests are all new because 150 years ago, if you came here, the forests would have all been chopped down. They would have all been gone. You go into those woods and there's 250,000 miles of stone walls in those woods. And those stone walls are where houses used to be that were consumed by the trees.
Really?
Like the forest the forest grew back, but it's still new growth.
Huh.
And it carries the scars of those stone walls, of those trails, of those old like kind of farms and what have you. It still carries that. And it is this kind of like psychic hurt. And, mountains run deep and the cores of the mountains are strong. But it's true that like the surfaces have been really badly ravaged through, 400 years of occupation and colonization and settlement. And I think that it feels self-evident that has a spiritual impact as well as a physical one. The Small and Forgotten Gods in Wanderhome are a pretty direct representation of my spiritual beliefs. And I think I frequently write about magic as something that is small and works in subtle ways, much like magic does in the real world, which also I think feels true. And I think that all of that kind of does, like all of that is true and is present. And, all art is autobiographical, right?
Can you tell us more about the small but not forgotten, right? Or
The small and they're small and forgotten gods.
And forgotten.
Because to me, yeah, small and forgotten. Well, in Wanderhome, they are the tiny spirits that exist all around you, right? They're these motes of being that don't necessarily have a name and don't necessarily have much of a form, but if you know how to listen and you can sit with them, they can teach you things because they're present in the world the way you are. And they live kind of in all sorts of things and all sorts of sizes. And there are bigger gods in Wanderhome too, right? But the small and forgotten gods are, they would be easy to forget, ironically, if it wasn't for the beautiful mushroom parade among the first few pages of Wanderhome, which is it's a beautiful illustration that kind of really forces you to be like, whoa, that's part of the game. But they're an important part. They're a subtle part. But they're kind of part of this understanding of, it was important to me to communicate that the world of Wanderhome is emotionally and thematically more than just what we see in front of ourselves. And we don't understand the small and forgotten gods, but we can relate to them and discuss with them and like hold their counsel and like listen to their thoughts, and have this kind of more conversational relationship with the world we exist in, rather than like, it was important to me that the characters of Wanderhome are not tourists. I like try very hard to make that present. And part of that is the small and forgotten gods.
I'm just thinking about how, I don't know, just thinking about how all of this is very much, I don't know, there's something, do you think there's something kind of like a Tolkien-esque spirituality to this? Because I feel like this reminds me of like the spirituality I read in Tolkien, which is kind of a spirituality that I've always found appealing to me.
Yeah.
In like a Christian way, because Tolkien is a Christian, and like to me, it's not incompatible with my Christianity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That does make sense. I think I have a deep love for spirituality. And kind of like, I don't know, I put work into making sure that like the pilgrim and the caretaker represented a spiritual relationship, and that they represented two different forms of spiritual relationship. And the pilgrim especially, I'm actually really proud of kind of in how it relates to like this, a lot of the parts of Christianity that have like heavily appealed to me. I'm the kind of person where it's like, the only reason I'm not a religion is because I grew up with two atheist parents. If I had anything else, I probably would be. If I like you put me in a church for too long, and I'll get baptized. I swear. But Um, I have, I think like yeah, I'm interested in spirituality and faith as this kind of like present continuous dialogue between
Mm,
myself and the land,
mm,
and the world and the communities I exist in.
mm-hmm.
And I work really hard to kind of have that present in my games. Like I'm not interested in telling stories about worlds where magic doesn't exist, not because like, oh, like just like to me magic does exist. Like magic is present in whatever form that is, right? Like kind of in whatever conceptualization we have for that. But like spirituality feels very present in a way where like I'm not interested in the details of that spirituality, where like I'm not interested in being like like I'm not the kind of person who writes a game that like I don't know, like I'm interested in spirituality as a process of relationship, right? Like as bonds we form between each other and the land, not as like, oh, this is doctrine or something. Like that's not how I write. That's not like
Yeah.
I don't like telling stories about oppressive churches or like fanatical zealots,
Mm,
because they're just not, that just doesn't feel resonant to my relationship with faith.
mm, mm.
Um,
Oh, that's okay. I'll write a game about that.
that's for you.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, when you work in the system long enough, right? You become. I think
Oh, I'm sure.
I
Yeah,
work for the
you've
church, so
probably met.
mhm.
Yeah, you've probably met more folks on that front than I have. Even I find it like for me, it's like I wanna understand and love my
Yeah,
characters, even when they're at their messiest. And I
yeah.
feel like there's a way with zealotry where I'm like, I haven't quite cracked the nut on that one, but
Interesting. Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah.
Well, so I also was just thinking about how like I talked with Meg Baker a few weeks ago on the show about like the idea of play as being the same kind of psychic space as religion, and so there's like something
Yeah,
about
play is ritual. Yeah.
right, it's something about like um that experience of numinous that you described, of like when you have an encounter that makes you realize that the universe is so much bigger and
Mm-hmm.
than you realize it is, or have experienced, and the like fear, right, that like comes from that,
Mm-hmm.
of the bigness of it, and like and like that experience of like the world is other. That's magic. That's like all these things that we play with in our play space. And like, so I think that people in our secular culture, like, we're moving like, one of the things that I think games can do is like help us have those numinous experiences of something, that the world is bigger than we are, or like this experience, or
Mm-hmm.
like kind of understand that in a different way as we engage with religion less, like as we're a little more secular, that games can do that.
Yeah, and that was almost my great heartbreak when I went from LARPs to tabletop, where in a LARP you have this capacity to show someone it in a very immediate sense. Like I remember this one time I was playing a LARP, and it was this game about being a village that existed in a forest full of spirits, and there were a lot of problems going on in the village, but one of the ones that people had to solve was that summer was going on for too long. It was too hot. The heat wouldn't break. And so they had to find the seed of winter and bring it to the forest god. And the forest god took the seed of winter, and it had been a hot week. It had been a miserable week. It was burning hot. Forest god took the seed from their hands, took this big plant object, and droplets of water start to fall from the sky. And the forest god, I want you to imagine this person wearing this orange stag head with these huge antlers, and from the antlers are hanging these like strips of paper, and they're wearing like these vast robes, and like there's this like chime, there's like this beautiful music playing from all around them, because there was a speaker set up in the lake, like by the lake, and it was this lake basin, right? It's like lake valley, and so the sound resounded off of the mountain, the mountains, and created this echo
Wow.
of this beautiful harmonious music. And the forest god takes the seed, and as they do, the first droplets of rain start to fall, and they walk to where the seed must be buried, And as they place it into the ground, it starts to rain, and the rain just starts thundering down. Um, and like, yeah, like, was that one of the most spiritual experiences I've had? Yes. Was that in the context of play? Yes. Like, was that the land playing with us? Right. Like when we would LARP, we would always invite the land to play with us because the land is just as much a member of the game as the people themselves, which is very rarely so literally. And like that was like this transformative, powerful experience that can happen. And you can't do that in a tabletop game. Can't do any part of that in a tabletop game. That was like realizing that I was like, oh man, now I just have to describe this and hope people can like do it to themselves.
Yeah.
I can't like. There's this great article that I come back to a lot called what is it? I just opened up the article, another tab called. Oh no, I lost the article. What the caves are trying to tell us, I think. And what the games are trying to tell us. And it opens with the line, every so often I get the urge to drag someone into a cave and show them something unspeakable. The urge grabs me suddenly in the middle of a conversation, for instance, when someone airily remarks that humans are just naturally competitive, or when they say that words just have meanings. I want to take him to the cave, grab Damore by the scruff of his awful crew neck white t-shirt, pull his twitching, dangling body up to the scrub and rocks of some remote hillside and into the cave. There we'll push him into one of its huge, damp, cool, cathedral-like halls of fractured rock where the darkness and the vastness of empty space seem to press themselves tightly against your skin, close and clawed and ancient. We know that there were people here some 20,000 years ago. They left their millstones and their axe heads. They left walls blackened with soot from fires that went out aeons ago, leaving traces across a chasm of time that could swallow up the entirety of recorded history 4 times over. They left the bodies of their dead, and they left marks on the walls. The people who lived in this cave 20,000 years ago, people who lived lives it's impossible for us to even imagine, are still trying to talk to us. And like, you can't do that in a tabletop game. You can kind of do that a little bit more in a LARP, though.
Yeah, it's so important to have though to have experiences that give you that, like, to have those kinds of experiences, right? Like it is it is the way in which we transition from what we know to things that are things we don't know, right? It's like how we broaden our mind. It's how we come to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, or things outside of our normal space, and like experience the other as more than other, and things like that. Like I think without those experiences, we are left as being I think it makes us
tools of capitalism.
Yeah. So there you go. Exactly. Oh man, well, we could talk about this for another hour probably if we wanted to. Jay, thank you for coming on Holy Happy Hour. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. I appreciate you being willing to share some of your spiritual worldview with us. It's been awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We didn't get to talk too much. We talked a little bit about what you're working on next, but should people keep an eye out for anything in particular?
Oh, just subscribe to my Patreon. I can't plug it on Twitter or else the post doesn't show up, but do go subscribe to my Patreon, patreon.com/ I always try to do it on podcasts and stuff because I'm like, oh, well, I can do it here and I can't do it there.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Patreon.com/ Possum Creek. Come on over to the Patreon. I just put up a first look for the next game I've been working on. It's called Olma National Park, and it is about people exploring and navigating an impossible national park. It's the game with like the 20-page playbooks I mentioned earlier.
Nice.
Awesome. It's also got other cool stuff. It's got a second edition for Sleepaway getting sketched out there. Come support patreon.com/ Possum Creek. So you can find my cool stuff. And there's a great Discord.
Nice. Awesome. I did hear that there was a second edition of Sleepaway in the works through the grapevine.
In the works. Yeah, the first look of it, and the first look, it's interesting. It's weird. It's thank you, Mav, for confirming. It is Sleepaway Dusk is a delightful time if you're looking for perhaps a way to ratchet up your Sleepaway games.
Cool. Cool. Well, thank you, Jay. I'm going to ask Jay to hang out here in the digital green room for a few more minutes, and gonna switch back to just me here for a moment, so I could just say goodbye to you all and say thank you for watching. Huge thanks to Jay Dragon for coming on Holy Happy Hour. That was a really fast hour and a half for me, so that means it's been an amazing episode. So I'm really appreciative of Jay. Hey, folks who are watching, please don't forget to hit the follow button here on the show if you've liked what you've seen. You could consider subscribing to the channel if you want to show some support. If you only caught part of tonight's episode, you'll be able to watch the entire thing. It'll be here, video on demand, for a brief time on Twitch, but it will be available forever. Well, forever in a certain sense, I suppose, on YouTube, on the Holy Happy Hour Batman YouTube channel. You can subscribe to our Holy Happy Hour Batman YouTube channel, hit the little bell so you get notified when we go live, like tonight, which hopefully this is live. I actually don't think it is. I had forgotten early on in the episode. I was like, oh, I forgot to hit go on the YouTube. And so no, I don't believe I ever actually hit go live on the YouTube. So this will be one of those episodes that I have to download and re-upload to YouTube. But you will be able to watch it forever on YouTube after the fact, I promise. You can go to allportsopen.com, which is our network, and you can watch all of the episodes after the fact there also. And you can check out our other great content. Like, for example, Delinquent Comics, which is my Masks Actual Play podcast. We had a new episode drop today. You can listen to that if you head over to allportsopen.com. Huge thanks to Joshua Wise, my APON co-founder, for the artwork on the stream. Someone commented earlier that, boy, there's a lot of alcohol on the screen. There is. You can thank Josh, who made this great bat cave here that I'm in. That might be TM'd. I don't know. But you could, he made that. Thank you. Huge thanks to Doctor Octoroc for the use of his music on the show. Hey, check out the Hard Lessons itch funding now. That's our game from APON Games. I'm doing the layout for that and some other things for it, and it's really cool. It's our first itch fund campaign for APON Games. Go check it out. That's the Hard Lessons. apongames.itch.io if you want to see what we're working on. Okay, so we are going to raid into a brand new horror stream in just a second. Our Monday night show from All Ports Open Network, we're playing one of our APON Games original games, The Worst Days, which is a horror game about being young, and they are doing like a summer pizza job game starting tonight. It's kicking off literally or like right now as we speak, so stick around because we're going to raid into that. I'd love for you to check it out, so just hold on to, don't go anywhere, stay tuned. We're going to raid into that show here in just 1 second. So thanks for watching. Enjoy the holiest and happiest of hours, my friends, and enjoy watching some of The Worst Days here on APON Games.